Yes. Welcome to our event this evening, which is entitled "Why Canada Must Say No to Deep Sea Mining," and we'll carry on now. Um, and you can carry on with the introduction, please. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute.
That would definitely help. I am very pleased to introduce Catherine Coumans, who will be our first speaker today. Catherine has coordinated the research and the Asia Pacific program at Mining Watch Canada for 25 years. Mining Watch is a founding organization of the Canadian Network for Corporate Accountability, CNCA, where Catherine provides strategic leadership on the steering committee. Both GRAN and MJAC are members of CNCA. With a human rights-based perspective, she has worked in solidarity with communities and Indigenous persons in more than 10 Asia-Pacific countries and in Tanzania. After doing field work on mining in Marinduque, Philippines in 1988 and 89, she was awarded a PhD in anthropology and has published on mining in 15 peer-reviewed publications, including the Canadian Journal of Development Studies, UBC Law Reform, Journal of Sustainable Finance and Investment, Current Anthropology, and the Extractive Industries and Society. The Canadian government appointed Catherine as an advisor in the national roundtables on the Canadian extractive industry in developing countries in 2006 and 2007. She has provided expert testimony on mining in congressional inquiries in the Philippines, before the Constitutional Court in Indonesia, for Canadian parliamentary and Senate committees, as well as an amicus brief for the Supreme Court of the United States. She is now incorporating her research on deep seabed mining into her writing. Catherine is not only extremely knowledgeable and well-traveled, she is also intrepid and is willing to challenge some of Canada's biggest mining companies. Welcome, Catherine Coumans.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that warm welcome. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, so I'm going to get started, and hopefully I will be able to cover all that ground in the time that I've been given. So, in brief, deep seabed mining is essentially a proposed expansion of profit-seeking land-based mining for metals and minerals into the ocean, and specifically the deep seabed. The proposed expansion of mining onto the seabed in international waters is unprecedented in scale. If 17 exploration concessions that have already been granted so far, just in one part of the ocean between Mexico and Hawaii, if these 17 concessions are mined, it would create the world's largest mining zone in history, in a near pristine, highly biodiverse, but little understood and very fragile ecosystem. This is a new proposed industrial exploitation of our oceans, but it has not yet started, it has not yet been regulated, it has not yet been permitted in international waters. We have a chance to stop the largest proposed expansion of mining in history. So I'll just briefly try to sketch for you a little bit what it is that we're talking about when we talk about deep seabed mining. So there are 3 key deep sea ecosystems that are being targeted for mining. And each of these ecosystems is habitat for rich biodiversity of deep sea creatures, of which only a small fraction have yet been discovered. One of the ecosystems being targeted are hydrothermal vents. And these are most commonly found at depths of about 2.5 to 5 kilometers under the sea. These vents are like small underwater volcanoes. They spew hot, acidic, and metal-rich fluid up through the seafloor. As the fluid cools, the dissolved metals in the fluid precipitate out and they harden, and they create these hydrothermal vent-like chimneys. The chemicals spewing out through the vents would be toxic for most terrestrial species. And yet, hydrothermal vents are home to a great diversity of organisms that only live on or near these deep sea vents and are found nowhere else on Earth. These creatures feed on vent microbes, which derive energy from the chemicals coming from the vents via chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis from sunlight. It is thought that life on Earth may have started at these vents. The target minerals in the hydrothermal vents include things like copper, gold, silver, zinc, and lead. These metals would be mined by sending machines down to the vents to cut them up and bring them to the surface. Another ecosystem being targeted is what we call seamount crusts. Seamounts are underwater mountains. They're found at depths of about 800 meters to 2.5 kilometers under the sea surface. As seamounts span the biodiverse midwater zone of the ocean, they are characterized by very rich biodiversity that also serves as a source of food for many migratory species such as sharks and tuna. There are hard deposits on some of these seamounts that have taken millions of years to form, and that contain target metals such as cobalt, manganese, iron, copper, nickel, and platinum. These crusts would be mined by putting large machines into the ocean to cut them up and remove the crusts. Finally, there are polymetallic nodules. These are roughly fist-sized rocks between 2 to 10 centimeters in size. And these are found on the surface of the seabed on the abyssal plains of the ocean at great depths of 4 to 6 kilometers below the surface. Like seamount crusts, polymetallic nodules grow extremely slowly, something like millions of years for 1 centimeter of growth. While it used to be believed that the abyssal plains of the ocean were devoid of life, it is now understood that polymetallic nodules are in fact critical habitat, as they host various microbes and a wide variety of quite incredible deep sea organisms. It is believed that some 50% of marine life at these depths relies on these nodules for its existence. The minerals being targeted in these nodules include nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, and iron oxides. The way these nodules would be mined is by putting huge machines, like you saw in the video, on the seabed floor with like caterpillar-like tracks that would trawl the seabed, as you saw in the video, and suck up the nodules through a pipe to a ship at the sea surface. While trawling the seabed, these machines will kick up massive dust storms. This is fine seabed particles that will disperse and thereby threaten deep sea life far beyond the mined area. Furthermore, the fine particles that get sucked up to the ship with the nodules will be piped back down into the sea. We're believing that this is going to happen in the midwater zone, which is very biodiverse. And recent modeling has shown that in just 7 days of mining, seabed sediment plumes will spread 200 kilometers from the mining site. And in just 30 days, sediments from the midwater plume, that's the particles that they pump back down in, from the midwater plume from just one of the current mining concessions in the Pacific will reach the territorial waters of Hawaii and Kiribati. So I've already given you some idea of what the impacts will be, but let me just fill that in a little bit more. The threats that industrial deep seabed mining pose are really serious, both for global ecosystem sustainability. The ocean is linked to all life on Earth. For biodiversity, obviously, because you're literally removing habitat that is critical habitat for the species that live there, but also for food security, because we know that there are links between the creatures at every level of the sea all the way up to the surface. So there's also very great concern now by fisheries industries and certainly by Pacific peoples who rely on the ocean for their food security. And there's even concern about climate crisis, because we now know that there are carbons stored in the deep sea bed, and it is believed that these would be released through deep sea bed mining. So on the impacts on marine life, it used to be said that the ocean at these extreme depths was pretty well devoid of life. As I mentioned, nothing could be further from the truth. A recent expedition to the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, this is the area between Mexico and Hawaii that I mentioned earlier. It's a really large area in the ocean, about twice the size of India, called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. And that's where these polymetallic nodules are. So in this area, there was a recent expedition that brought up 6,000 to 8,000 deep sea species, of which 5,000 were completely new to science. And as scientists say, with every expedition they do, they come across thousands of creatures they've never seen before. The creatures that live at these great depths in the ocean are unlike any we have on land. They have unique properties that allow them to exist in complete darkness, near zero temperatures, crushing depths. But they're also extremely fragile to disturbance. They're used to being left alone. They are very long-lived, but they are very slow to mature and to reproduce. Not only do we know very little about the species that will be destroyed by deep-sea mining, but we also do not yet understand how they relate to the entire web of life in the water column above them to the sea surface. The biggest challenges we face in stopping deep seabed mining are that a lot of private companies and countries think that they can make a lot of money by mining the seabed for its metals. And there is a push on by many global north countries to secure access to what they call critical minerals for energy transition and for military purposes. I will come back to this later. So I just want to briefly describe for you a little bit at least one of the companies that is at the forefront of pushing for this to go ahead. And it's a Canadian company called the Metals Company based in Vancouver, and its relationship to the International Seabed Authority, which is the agency that is granting exploration permits and eventually will grant also exploitation permits unless we can stop it. So a little bit about the ISA. So individual countries, such as Canada or others, have the right to permit seabed mining exploration and exploitation in their own territorial waters. But the seabed in international waters was designated as a common heritage of humankind in 1970 through the United Nations. And for that reason, permits for mining, exploration, or exploitation in international waters have to be granted by an autonomous agency established under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, called the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, which is based in Jamaica. The ISA is pushing to finish mining regulations and start permitting mining as soon as 2025. The ISA is a deeply problematic institution with a conflicting mandate to both protect the marine environment related to the international seabed for future generations of humankind, and to permit the exploitation of the seabed by mining. It is an experimental multi-state, there's about 167 countries involved in the International Seabed Authority plus the EU. So it's a multi-state governance institution. It is experimental and it's new because it's, as far as I know, the only one that would regulate the private sector. But under the current Secretary General, Michael Lodge, this agency has functioned more as a promotional organization for deep seabed mining rather than an institution with a mandate to protect the seabed. So just to give you a few examples, there should have been a 5-year review of the ISA, and that has just not happened, it just was skipped. The current Secretary General is vying for an unprecedented 3rd term. There is increasing difficulty for NGOs, Indigenous observers, and the media to gain access to the meetings. They're being kicked out. There are now 25 countries that are calling on the International Seabed Authority to ban or to create a moratorium or a precautionary pause, it's sometimes called, on the development of regulations and the issuing of permits for deep seabed mining in international waters. But it's very difficult for these countries to get this on the agenda. So it's a very bureaucratic institution, and if something is not on the agenda, it's just not discussed, and getting this on the agenda is very difficult. So I want to briefly say something about the problematic relationship between the ISA and the Vancouver-based company, the Metals Company, and its CEO, Gerard Barron. So the Metals Company is the most vocal promoter of deep seabed mining, and it sells itself as being the first that will get a permit to start mining as early as 2025 or 2026. And I'll get into this again later, but they're saying they will ask for a permit to mine even if the regulations are not in place, because it's becoming very difficult to get the regulations done. So Gerard Barron, the CEO, has a background in marketing. He has no experience with mining. He's been described as a serial entrepreneur. His first foray into deep seabed mining was through his investments in another Canadian company called Nautilus Minerals. And it was interesting, in the video that you saw, you heard some of the scientists from Nautilus Minerals speaking in that video. And Nautilus Minerals was the first to secure the first global permit for deep seabed mining. It was of hydrothermal vents, these vents where life is believed to have started on Earth. And this was in 2011, and it was in the territorial waters of Papua New Guinea. So in that case, Nautilus Minerals, another Canadian company, didn't have to go through the International Seabed Authority. They just got this permit from Papua New Guinea, the Papua New Guinea government, even though the Papua New Guinea government had no regulations for deep seabed mining. So Barron profited handsomely when Nautilus went public in 2007. It's reported that he turned a $226,000 investment into a $31 million profit by the time he divested in 2008. Papua New Guinea coastal communities fought a long battle against the Nautilus project, and the company eventually went bankrupt in 2019, but not without leaving the government of Papua New Guinea with a debt of $125 million. In 2011, the founder of Nautilus Minerals, a man called David Hayden, created another Canadian deep sea mining company, which he called Deep Green Resources. And Hayden brought Gerard Barron into that company as CEO. So Deep Green created partnerships with small Pacific Island countries, Nauru, Tonga, and Kiribati, which allowed Deep Green to secure deep sea mining concessions for exploration through the International Seabed Authority. And so, at the same time that Nautilus and then Deep Green was seeking these concessions at the ISA, the Secretary General, Michael Lodge, was allowing himself to be featured in promotional videos of Deep Green, wearing their hard hat, being on their ship. So again, problematic for a governance institution to allow itself to be promoted by a company that was seeking permits. In 2021, Barron decided to take Deep Green public and change the name to the Metals Company in a bid to raise capital from investors. Just before the public offering, TMC's partner nation Nauru helped the Metals Company in its pitch to would-be investors by triggering a never-before-used rule of the International Seabed Authority, one that has been described as the nuclear option. Because once triggered, it allows mining companies to apply to start mining the seabed within 2 years, even if the regulations and guidelines for this mining are not yet completed. By triggering the 2-year rule, Nauru allowed its partner, the Metals Company, to announce to investors that it would receive a permit to start mining as early as mid-2023, regardless of progress in rule development at the International Seabed Authority. It's not hard to understand why Nauru had pinned its hopes on the revenues from deep seabed mining. Nauru is a 21 square kilometer Pacific island. It's one of the smallest countries in the world, with a population of about 10,000 people, that has been devastated by phosphate strip mining for over a century, which has made about 80% of Nauru uninhabitable. It is dismaying, however, to see a small, desperate country partnered with a cash-poor startup mining company as the primary movers in the race to mine the fragile deep sea bed. In August of 2022, a damning investigative journalism expose by the New York Times called Secret Data, Tiny Islands, and a Quest for Treasure on the Ocean Floor documented the long-term relationship between the now Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, Michael Lodge, and David Hayden. So if you'll remember, David Hayden was a principal in Nautilus and then brought Barron into Deep Green. So the article exposes that confidential data held by the International Seabed Authority with regard to very lucrative nodule areas in that Clarion-Clipperton zone I mentioned before, which had been set aside for developing countries, was shared with Hayden by Michael Lodge, leading ultimately to these areas becoming concessions of Deep Green, and now these are the concessions of the Metals Company. So the final thing I want to talk to you about is, where are these metals going to end up? What are we are sacrificing huge swaths of life on the ocean floor, essentially forever, because these metals will not come back. They took millions of years to form. We will never see those again, and we will never see the habitat or the creatures. So what are we sacrificing them for? Well, the seabed in international waters was designated as a common heritage of humankind in 1970 through the UN, and it was specified that the international seabed, and I'm quoting, shall be open to use exclusively for peaceful purposes by all states. Jared Barron has become famous for arguing that we have to mine the deep sea bed in order to secure the metals needed for the technology for the energy transition, to save the world from climate change. In other words, provide the metals needed to save the world from climate change. He carries a nodule around in his pocket, and he will take that out and he will say, look, this is a battery in a rock. In other words, the nodule can provide the batteries, for example, for electric vehicles. And he argues that we need to make the sacrifice of the deep sea bed, metals and habitats in order to be able to save the world from climate change by using those metals for the technology. However, recently, last year and this year, we've started to find out that the Metals Company has been lobbying for financial support in Washington, D.C., with an offer to bring the United States a bounty of mined seabed metals, which are on the U.S.'s critical minerals list. And he's saying, we'll bring these metals to the U.S. for processing. As the war in Ukraine has depleted U.S. stocks of some types of ammunition to uncomfortably low levels, the geopolitical contest between China and the U.S. over control of critical minerals needed for defense purposes has focused debate on where to access those minerals and how the deep sea bed can feature in getting the minerals needed for the defense purposes. China is considered to have an advantage as it holds multiple concessions in international waters through the International Seabed Authority, while the US is excluded from concessions through this body as it has not ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. As military interest in accessing metals derived from mining, the common heritage of humankind, ramps up, cheered on by the Metals Company, this raises serious questions about whether military applications of deep seabed minerals align with the UNCLOS mandate that the use of the seabed should be exclusively for peaceful purposes by all states. And I've been suggesting that the Metals Company should change its slogan to, from a battery in a rock to a missile in a rock. Thank you.
Oh, Catherine, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So informative, but also taking us right to the present and how deep sea mining can and may be misused in so many ways. Thank you very much, Catherine. I am going to call on Liz Dill to introduce our second speaker, Christopher Pollon. Liz.
Thank you, Corey. Christopher Pollon is a Vancouver-based freelance journalist who reports on the politics of natural resources, focusing on mining, oceans, and energy. His work has appeared in dozens of publications, including The Guardian, National Geographic, Mother Jones, The Walrus, and the Globe and Mail. He is the author of The Peace in Peril, The Real Cost of the Site C Dam. His most recent book, Pitfall, The Race to Mine the World's Most Vulnerable Places, has been published in North America, the UK, and Australia, and is widely available across Canada, including at indie bookstores and public libraries, both of which he goes out of his way to support. In the introduction to Pitfall, Christopher says that it is intended as a wake-up call, that its ultimate goal is to kickstart a discussion about how we can source metals, the metals we need for the future, without figuratively and literally wrecking the place. Today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce him so that you may hear about his experiences and thoughts on the social and environmental impacts of mining in general and deep sea mining in particular. Please welcome Christopher Pollon.
I want to thank Liz for the invitation to talk and that wonderful introduction. Also, I'd like to thank the folks at the Grandmothers Advocacy Network for co-sponsoring this amazing event, as well as the good people at MJAC as well. I spent about 2 years working on Pitfall, and my section where I deal with deep sea mining, I covered that in the latter section of the book where I'm looking at where we will go in the future to mine, where we will potentially go in the future to mine, and deep sea mining figured in a big way in that section. The section is actually called "Where Do We Go From Here?" And it's an open question because the future will be metals intensive if we hope to electrify our civilization. But at the same time, we are seeing the emergence of opportunists and speculators who are hoping to cash in on the imperative to deal with climate change. So my entry point into deep sea mining was a couple years ago. And at the time, I had heard about Deep Green, which is the company, the leading company that Catherine mentioned.
About 5:45, and then we're going to have eggs tonight and scrambled eggs and salad.
Okay, Robin's talking about dinner, I think. Okay, and so my entry point was a Zoom meeting in late 2020 when the metals company, and at this time they were known as Deep Green, were holding an event, and it was meant as a public information event and also to inform investors about the opportunities as well. And so I connected to the Zoom, and at first I thought I had the wrong meeting. So the meeting was emceed by an actor named Ian Somerhalder, who was, I don't know if any of you know this, but at the time there was this really popular TV show. It was like kind of like a soap opera, but it was a vampire thing. And it was called The Vampire Diaries. And he was promoting the company and showering a lot of love on Deep Green at the time. And so remember at this point that, as Catherine noted, that Deep Green has emerged into, I would say, the most advanced company, now publicly traded company, hoping to mine for metallic nodules that are located in that section between Hawaii and Mexico, in that Pacific, where some of the richest deposits have been identified. And so I'm sitting at this meeting, and the feeling that I was at the wrong place was not dispelled when Jared Barron, the CEO, appears, and he's this long-haired guy. He's in a leather jacket, and he was unlike, and like over the years, like 15 years, I've been going to events like this, and I've never seen a CEO who presented himself more like Bono than a dry geologist rhyming off, statistics about reserves and what's in the ground and what have you. And so I really had the sense that this was a really different sort of company. And so Barron started talking about what the mission of the company was, and it wasn't it was about a mission. It was like an NGO. He was talking about the company the way a nonprofit organization would talk about what it was doing. And so he said that deep sea mining has the lightest planetary touch. It's taking place in an environment with very low biomass. And I'm telling you this just so you can understand the messaging that's happening and how deep sea mining is being sold to investors. He saw the company as stewards of these rocks on the bottom of the ocean. And the metaphor he used for deep sea mining as they planned, which is essentially a dredging operation, was to literally sit on, which was to harvest these rocks that literally sit on the ocean floor like golf balls on the driving range. And so to successfully sell deep sea mining to investors, which remains a very high risk investment, it's taken a new breed of mining speculator. And we're seeing the evolution of that with the clean energy transition and the emergence of this altruistic mission to mine. And so in that way, Deep Green at that moment, and it's continued to this present, has emerged as kind of the vanguard of this new kind of 21st century mining company. That's the altruistic, in the book I call it the altruistic for-profit corporation as climate savior. And as Catherine mentioned, Barron and his company, they quite often don't like to be referred to as miners. And with a bit of further analysis, you see that it makes sense because he comes from a marketing background, and one of his first fortunes came from growing an Australian company to revenues of 100 million. And as Catherine mentioned, before there was even an industry for deep sea mining, before there was even a market for any of these metals, he had made fabulous wealth from the industry. So to flash forward a little bit, I wanted to share with you, this company has attempted to differentiate itself from the destructive world of land mining. So quite often they'll talk about strip mines for nickel, which is an important metal for making batteries at present. And he'll talk about how we don't have to do that. We can mine in a much softer touch in the ocean. And through my analysis, as I went on and learned more and more about it, I identified, I guess I'd say, three red flags, so to speak. And underlying these concerns are my conviction that already, before an industry already exists for deep sea mining, we are seeing some of the characteristic defining aspects of some of the worst on land mining, the very activity that this company and many others eventually are hoping to employ and deploy. So there's three that I've identified, and here's one, and we've already talked about it a little bit, but financial speculation, the casino aspect of mining as a high risk activity. As Catherine noted, before there was even an industry, deep sea mining industry, Barron had turned around a relatively small investment into over $30 million. And one of the poorest countries on earth, Papua New Guinea, was not so lucky, right? Like they ate a $120 million investment in that same venture. So financial speculation's one. Dubious regulators. We see this in land, particularly in the global south, where quite often poor countries don't have the wherewithal, and there's corruption, rule of law might be weak. But it's similar but different. You know, the UN body that's overseeing the industry and is basically, as Catherine noted, responsible both for regulation and promotion, which is a huge red flag and something that I hope that they can address somehow before this short-term deadline, this race to finalize regulations happens, which could see deep sea mining by 2025 at the soonest. And related to that is number 3 is seeing the same power imbalance that we see in the global south with so much mining. When you have these financially savvy, sophisticated companies and players who come in, and meanwhile, nation states that are racked by poverty have endemic corruption. There's this power imbalance where the citizens of those countries, it's very difficult for them to see any fair portion of the money that's going to come from this kind of mining. And so again, deep sea mining is a good example of that. Now, one thing I'd like to save as much time as possible if people have questions for Catherine and myself. One thing I was going to say was that 2 things maybe to conclude. Before we start mining the deep ocean, I think we really need to think about where our metals come from right now. And we need to make the most of the metals that are already above ground. So it gets called the circular economy. It's about keeping resources in use in our society for as long as possible. And as it stands right now, North Americans are enormous gluttons when it comes to metals. You know, our phones are treated as disposable garbage. The average is every 2 years. And you know, just think about this, is that in 1945, the year my book Pitfall begins, humanity relied on just about a dozen mined metals. And if you flash forward that to now, we use the entire periodic table. And this reliance is not gonna diminish. So we need to start thinking about disposable consumption and what we need and what we do not need. And one other thing I'll say about deep sea mining and the impacts of that, which Catherine covered brilliantly, was just the idea of environmental impacts, for example, sediment plumes and what have you, is that I think it's important to keep in mind that regardless of what people say, proponents, people that are trying to sell stock and everything else, we will not know what deep sea mining at scale looks like from an environmental perspective until it is created and mobilized at scale. And so up to that point, it's going to be a question mark. And it's a risky one, and it's a risky action for everyone to take. And so that's it. I'm going to leave it at that for now. And I'll just maybe close with one thing. In tribute to that beautiful opening, you know, while you people were watching, you couldn't see, but my squid was with us. I think it's a Humboldt. And he's a deep ocean dweller. So he was with us on that one. Thank you very much.
Christopher, thank you. I've read only a portion of Pitfall, but I admired the language. And now that I've heard you speak, your choice of language is so picturesque and so expressive. Thank you for those very interesting comments. We are going to move on to questions, and so there are several questions in the chat. I'm going to Janet, you've taken away my chat box. Thank you. I think we'll ask Catherine this question. Catherine, what is a marine protected area, and how do these relate to the ban on deep sea mining?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one way in which people are trying to address this huge threat that we're now all facing. And you know, it's I can understand why people would try this as a way to stop deep seabed mining, but the problem is that the way that they're planning to mine is the footprint is going to be really huge. And, you know, the ocean is a fluid environment. It's different than on Earth where you can sort of try to contain things. You can't contain things in the ocean. So in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, the area that we've been talking about, it's not the only place where there's concessions for exploration, but there's 17 exploration licenses in just that zone between Hawaii and Mexico. There's also some protected areas. So they've carved off these little protected areas within the mining concession. But if you look at the, you know, there's maps of this. If you look at the map and you see all the concessions, and then you see these protected areas, and then you start to realize, you know, the modeling that's finally being done on these plumes, you realize that it's going to be really hard. You know, you can't build a wall around those protected areas to keep that contamination out. So, you know, it's a strategy, but it's probably better to just have it banned, you know. And so one of the things that people are proposing is that we look at the deep sea bed the way we look at Antarctica. So we come up with a treaty to say it's okay, all nations can go there for scientific purposes, but not for exploitation or financial gain. And that's really where we need to go. So in other words, not little pockets of protected areas, but the entire international seabed to be understood as protected in the same way that Antarctica is through a treaty, so that it would only be an area for scientific research, but not for exploitation for gain.
Yes, that explains it very well. Christopher, you mentioned the circular economy. It's a phrase that we hear about, and two related questions here, which is how can we reuse metal objects now? Perhaps some concrete examples, and is there work going on to recycle metals from phones and computers, batteries, ongoing projects of recycling that you may be aware of? The circular economy and how can we reuse metal?
Okay, you know, when I looked at recycling of metals in Pitfall, I was actually quite surprised at how dismal our efforts are to recycle, like even metals like copper. So the most recent, really in-depth research that was done to try to look at global recycling rates, just to understand how much we're reusing and everything else, was done by Yale and the UN in 2011. And I called up some of the scientists that had researched that, and they told me that the dial had not moved significantly on a lot of those metals. And you know, think about a phone, like a cell phone. You know, the rare earths in that phone, which give that device the computing power of 2 rooms of 1970s mainframe computers, we basically throw those out. They're used in very minute quantities in each phone. And at this point, it's not economical to do that. Yet rare earth mining is some of the most destructive mining that is happening on the face of the earth, in particular the processing. And so And maybe just to jump back to, and so we have a long way to go. I feel like there's real low-hanging fruit with reusing, and everything points to reducing our disposable consumption. And so that's why I'm really focused on the circular economy right now. And I'll just give you a few examples of, I live in East Vancouver, and I'm currently trying to get started this project where it's kind of creating the circular economy hub. And these are just some of the activities that are already happening. Like, so there are fix-it events where tinkers work at them, and you can go with your device, your whether it's a phone, electronics, whether it's a blender, you know, something you're ready to toss out, but just has a minor fix it needs. So there's those kinds of things happening in the community. There's things like mending circles where instead of throwing clothes out, people actually get together and learn how to sew again, which is a lost art to most people. And there's so many other different aspects, various lending approaches like libraries. The term library gets used a lot, but we're talking about everything from musical instruments to garden tools. Why buy something when you could just take it out almost like the library? And again, the footprint of all this is way less, and that has a direct translation not only into the metals we use, but even more fundamentally, the greenhouse gas emissions. If we're really serious about even dealing with climate change on a much wider scale, it's all about disposable, the disposable stuff that we gluttonize, and I include myself in that gluttony.
Christopher, in Victoria, which is where I live, we have repair cafes, very much like Fix It at a different name. And we also recently, we now have a tool library, and that's what it's called. So yes, those ideas are around, and they're inspiring. They are steps that we can all take in a more conservative direction. Conservative, not in the political sense. So but thanks for that, your comments. We have a question about sacrifice zones. Who has the most to gain, but more importantly, who has the most to lose when we designate areas as sacrifice zones? Catherine and Christopher, Catherine, could I ask you to perhaps explain again what a sacrifice zone is and what are the implications for the,
It's so interesting how these terms come up, right? Sacrifice zone. I mean, when you talk about sacrificing something, there's always someone who is sacrificing and someone who is gaining. You don't sacrifice something for no reason. And you basically have to look at who are the winners and who are the losers, right? And if you're talking about the international seabed, obviously all the creatures that are there are being considered sacrificial for the purposes of gaining these metals for human beings. So we're creating this dichotomy between human beings become the so-called winners and these creatures become the losers. But if you also think of the international seabed as the common heritage of humankind, back in 1970, this was recognized as a common heritage of all of us, then sacrificing that common heritage, which should be there for generations to come, for the short-term financial gain of a company like the metals company is really atrocious. Like it's abominable. Who is sacrificing the creatures plus our future generations who will never know that part of the ocean as an intact ecosystem, but also all of the unknown consequences of destroying, and we're talking about really huge swaths of area in the ocean, right? And all the unknown consequences. You know, as long as you're not a fisherman in the Pacific and you don't rely on the Pacific as part, not just of your food security, but also your cultural integrity and continuity. Well, you know, if you're Jared Barron, you don't have to worry about those things. You can get your food wherever you want, right? It's money in the bank that matters. And so, you know, I think when you talk about sacrifice zones, you have to look at what's being sacrificed, who is sacrificing, and who is gaining, and does that make sense?
You know, maybe just to add one thing.
Yeah.
There's someone who was, I think, with the UN, and he's a Canadian, and I think his last name's Boyd. I think David Boyd. I think possibly, and he's a rapporteur for, I think it was human rights a few years ago. But he people might want to Google this because this is an amazing document. He created this document, and it was the 50. It was like 50 global sacrifice zones, and it was all to do with. If anyone's interested in learning more about that concept, you can learn about it in 50 examples with photos and details. And it's an amazing document. Anyone that is curious about learning more about that, because it really illuminated it for me.
Christopher, could I ask you to put that that name in the chat and any other reference you have to it? Thank you. Very, you know, I think I'm going to just interrupt the questions for a moment because I want to tell you about an action that we've come up with from MJAC and from GRAN. We actually started this past weekend a postcard campaign. I don't know if you can see my postcard, but we have developed a postcard to send to the Minister of Fisheries and to our MPs. And we would like to send you a packet of postcards, if you can make use of them, for you to send to your MP and to the Minister of Fisheries. There are 2 different postcards. And if you would like to receive a packet of 10 postcards that you can use and share with others, if you will send us an email at info@mjacvictoria.ca, we will, and we need your mailing address, of course, but we will mail you a packet of these postcards, and then you can send them postage free to your MP and to the Minister of Fisheries, Diane Libertillier, and tell them, you can tell the minister and your MPs to say no to deep sea mining, to demand an international treaty ban on deep sea mining, to protect the world's oceans, and to protect the future of our children. So it's an offer. If you would, once again, I'll put that email address in the chat, but you have to send us your mailing address so that we can send you the postcards, and then you can mail them postage free. And of course, please also let us suggest to you that you can write a letter. You can send an email or write a letter to your MP on this subject and to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and tell them we have to stop deep sea mining. Canada must stand up to protect the world's oceans. So that is my interruption of the question period. I have a very intriguing question here. Why is there a reason why the metals company is based in Canada? Oh, Canada and mining. We know that's a big issue. Catherine, could you tell us how does it happen that we have so many mining companies in Canada?
Yeah, we have more than, we have almost 50% of all the mining exploration and mining companies in the world are listed on our stock exchanges, and many are headquartered here. And if you go to the building where the metals company is headquartered in Vancouver, it's a small office with a lawyer there. And what you'll often find in places just a post office box. And there are a lot of reasons for this. It's quite complex, but one of the ones is that Canada, and this is not well understood or known, Canada is essentially a tax haven. There's relationships that Canada has with other well-known tax havens like the Canary Islands that allow people to move money through Canada without being very transparent around that. So that's certainly one of the reasons. It's called snow washing. If you Google snow washing, you'll get a lot of information about this. But that is certainly one of the reasons. Our disclosure requirements, our transparency is much lower than in other places. So that's another reason for companies that don't want to have too much knowledge about what they're up to. There's a lot of other reasons, but particularly for this kind of company that really doesn't have an income, right? It's a company that has no income, and is not a well-known company that would be, for example, because the other reasons Canada is a place to headquarters if you want to make use of all the expertise here. Like we have law firms that are very focused on helping mining companies deal with their legal problems. And the metals company is using one of those law firms, by the way. There's many lawsuits against the metals company right now from investors that are not happy with how things have gone. So they use one of our law firms, but also we have consulting firms and, other kinds of technical expertise in Canada. But though that is for companies that are actually mining. For exploration companies, what's usually very interesting is the fact that we're basically a tax haven.
Yes, yeah.
One thing I was just going to throw in there as well, that's fascinating about that example, the metals company, is that a lot of companies that fly the flag of Canada are on the stock exchanges in Toronto. But what's interesting about them is that they're based in Vancouver. You'll notice they always say, a Vancouver company, but they're actually on the NASDAQ in the US. So they're not even on an exchange. They're on a stock exchange here. And the principals for that company are not Canadian. Barron's Australian. His wife's part of the executive team. So it's a fascinating question that I think needs a little more scrutiny.
Yes. Yeah. Canada is a haven for mining, just as we know about tax havens. Canada is a mining haven for mining companies. There are two questions. One is about the military connection that you mentioned, the military use. Catherine, you mentioned the military use for some of these rare earth minerals. Could you expand? Could you expand on that a bit about the military use and?
I mean, this is what's really, really shocking right now. So the mining industry in general, over many decades, always has a mantle that they use to basically argue why mining should continue and should expand and should go onto small islands and into deserts and now into the seabed. And those mantles, those arguments that the mining industry has used over the years have changed. And so, for example, in the beginning, it was arguing that mining is sustainable because the metals can be reused and recycled. And then when human rights issues were brought to the fore, the mining industry said, well, mining brings development because it brings jobs, it brings development. And now the argument for massively increased mining, not just going into the seabed, but massively increased mining on land as well, is we have to get these metals for the energy transition. We just have to accept more mining, way more mining, because we need those metals for wind turbines, for batteries, for EVs, for solar panels, etc. That's been the latest mantle of convenience for the mining industry, just to basically continue making huge profits, right? And It's odd because like gold is definitely not one of these critical minerals for the energy transition, but the gold mining companies keep saying, but we're also part of that, you know, they try to slip themselves in there. And so we talk about critical minerals, but if you look at Canada's critical minerals list, there's 31 minerals that Canada, metals and minerals that Canada has listed as its critical minerals. If you actually look at the publication that NRCan has up on its website, on the front, you'll see EV, you'll see wind turbines, you'll see electric, you'll see solar panels. But when you go into the report, you'll see that there's many metals there that their actual purposes is missiles and military aircraft. It's in the report. It's just a little bit buried. And what we're now seeing, which I find so discouraging, is that, you know, the US is of course lending military hardware to the big war now in Ukraine, but also in Gaza. And those stocks are being depleted, which is quite unusual, but they are actually now being depleted. And there's this huge battle going on, you know, geopolitical battle going on between the US and China on who can actually get their hands on the most metals so that they can build more bombs and more aircraft to basically win this geopolitical war of who's going to be the most powerful. And the US is at a disadvantage in this with respect to deep seabed mining, because as they often don't like to sign international treaties, they never signed the UN Convention on the Law on the Sea. And so they can't have any concessions in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone or international waters. But what the metals company is now doing, you know, the so-called hipster dude CEO of the metals company, Gerard Barron, who didn't always look like that, by the way. He used to be very clean cut, you know, and now he's transformed himself into this hipster dude to save the planet. He's now lobbying in Washington, D.C., and he's saying, okay, you guys have a problem. You can't access those metals directly for your bombs and for your missiles, etc. But I can bring them to you. You have to subsidize me, because he's always looking for money. And I will bring that to you and we can process them here. And then you have the metals. Essentially, you'll be getting the deep sea metals from international waters in the US, but you have to provide me with a lot of money. So that lobbying is going on. And it's just beyond belief that we would lose, you know, this critical habitat in the deep sea and have it be blown up in some war somewhere. Like, never mind recycling, we're literally destroying copper and other things right now in these wars. It's just the fact that humanity is at this point now is so discouraging. It's just horrible.
Yes.
That's where we are. Yeah.
Yes, and go ahead, please.
So I was just going to just tack on here that there is currently a bill before U.S. Congress about deep sea mining, or I read about this in March. And the idea with this is that, and I don't know if this is an extension of the lobbying that's been going on and what have you, but it's trying to get infrastructure to process nodules harvested from the deep sea as kind of a job creation thing. And the idea behind it as well is again this argument we've heard in the past with energy and other resources that it's a non-Chinese source of these metals. And with the geopolitics of this, we have to keep in mind that China is so far ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to making things like batteries and everything else, that it's kind of a sweet spot for deep sea miners to hit with politicians. And I'd be curious what Catherine thinks about the possibility of there being deep sea mining happening in US territorial waters, for example.
So there is discussion about that, but it's very interesting because Oregon, California, and Washington have all declared bans on deep sea mining within their territorial waters. But the US is now talking about a continental shelf that goes way, way out, and they're saying way out there is still part of the US and we could still mine there. So that's an ongoing discussion. But if you look at where the metals company and, you know, obviously others that are interested, but the metals company is always in the lead, where they're targeting their promotional, you know, lobbying in Washington. It's not the sections in Washington that would have to do with energy transition and metals. They tried that. They weren't getting anywhere with that. They're going to the Pentagon. They're going to the Defense Department. They're going to the hawks that are really worried about whether the US is going to be able to maintain its global position of power. That's where they're going. So that's where the hipster dude, you know, that's supposedly out to save the world is promoting his wares, you know, selling his wares at this moment. Really not his wares, our wares. So yeah, that's it. There's quite a lot of action going on right now in Washington around this. I mean, there's other weird things going on, like the Defense Department is now funding mines in Canada. 2 mines in Canada are now going to get direct money from the Defense Department in the US so that they can get a hold of graphite in one case, and I forgot what the metals are in the other case. Cobalt is one of them, I think. And basically, these are for critical minerals. These are for defense purposes. So it's a strange world we're living in now with mining.
Yeah, very disturbing information, but important that we know about it. There was a question also about the climate implications. You referred to the release of carbon if the deep sea is mined, and I know that is the case. And also, perhaps we could talk a little about the effect on Indigenous people. Are there Indigenous people that are resisting deep sea mining, and can they use UNDRIP to help them in their cause, or are they using it?
That's being looked at, and I have to say, I think our biggest hope for stopping this is going to come from Pacific peoples, including in Canada, but particularly Indigenous Pacific peoples. They are at the forefront. They are going to the ISA meetings in Jamaica now in greater numbers all the time. They are really communicating with each other. There's going to be a big meeting in, I think it is in June actually, in Hawaii, where Indigenous leaders from Pacific cultures, Pacific peoples are going to come together to try and stop seabed mining. And they are arguing both, you know, their cultural obligation to protect the earth, not just human beings, but the earth, but also their cultural links and ties to the sea and their cultural continuity and also food security, that they're playing a really, really large role at the moment.
I see there's a note in the chat that we should all invest in some shares, in stock shares of deep sea mining, and go to the AGM and ask some questions. So there's another strategy, another way to act. And I think that at least one person in our group tonight has done that, has shares in a mining company and uses that to bring some leverage to bear on them. Interesting comment.
It's not easy, actually. We've tried to get questions in at the AGM on the metals company because they do it virtual. They can control everything because it's a virtual AGM, and they don't answer all the questions. So it's really difficult.
Yes. I mentioned about the climate and the climate implications of mining. I wonder if we could go back to that and just really, again, say really clearly the effect of mining on climate and on, especially on carbonization.
Yes, and there's a lot of work still being done on this. There's a lot of research still being done on this. So, you know, this is an emerging area of research, because obviously this has not been something we've had to worry about in the past. But what we do know is that many, many creatures in the sea lock carbons up in their bodies. And when they die, those bodies go down to the seabed and they basically get locked up. So these carbons are locked up in the seabed through having been sequestered into the bodies of various deep sea creatures. And they've been doing some looking at how these carbons are remobilized when you stir up the deep sea bed, the way these huge machines that are as big as a house, you know, on tractors, remobilize this captured carbon through the plumes that are created. So that's, I'm not an expert in this, but there is a lot of research now. Absolutely, if you Google that, you will find articles that have been written about this concern. So yeah, again, right? Supposedly we need to do this to counter climate change, and yet we're going to actually contribute to creating more, releasing more carbon into the oceans.
Very good. Catherine, I don't want to leave Christopher out of the conversation, but I just want to ask a question about the ISA meeting that's coming up in July. And could you tell us what you think what Canada should be doing? What should Canada be prioritizing at that meeting?
Yeah, and I'm sure Christopher has some ideas about this as well. We've been really disappointed. So Canada has now put out a statement, which is a bit one of those statements with a lot of weasel words in it, but it is a statement saying that, you know, unless there's very strong regulations, Canada would not promote going ahead with deep sea mining. But there's this pressure being put on the whole system by the metals company in Nauru, right? Unbelievable. And they're basically saying, if you don't get those regulations done on time, we're going to go ahead without them, right? And that's a very real threat that they're putting out there. On the other hand, you have countries that are constantly trying to raise really important issues, like the fact that there really should be turnover at the Secretary General level. There have been countries like Germany is one that have raised questions about the perceived bias of this Secretary General. There should have been a 5-year review of all the instruments of the ISA and how they work and how they're not working. That review was just skipped. It just wasn't done. There's countries raising these issues and also raising the need for what they call like a general review that would allow also for a discussion on whether or not there should be a moratorium. And there's countries raising these things, and we're seeing the Canadian delegation either sitting on its hands or really reacting in ways that are not very helpful. So we have just recently sent a letter that MJAC also signed off on to the responsible ministers in Canada to say, hey, you know, before that July meeting, which is a really important meeting, our delegation needs to be reminded that it should be with the leadership countries, what they call the champion countries. So there are countries that are, you know, 25 countries have now come out with some kind of statement around moratorium or ban or precautionary pause. And some of those are very active in the meetings, you know, really pushing for better governance, more transparency, more participation of Indigenous peoples and other people who want to be at the meetings. And Canada has not been one of those leadership countries, has not been supporting some of these things. So we need to see that. And now that we sent this letter, 30 NGOs signed on. It was really great that MJAC was able to sign on as well. You know, we're hoping to see better behavior, but it's a very important meeting. I mean, we've been saying that now for a number of years, but because the metals company has been saying after this meeting, if these regulations aren't signed off on, and they won't be because they're nowhere near done, they're going to put in an application somewhere between June and or July and December to mine. And they're going to give the ISA some time, maybe even a year, to look at their application, but they're going to put in that application. And so, you know, they're putting a huge amount of pressure for their own personal gain reasons on a system that should not be pressured, that should be taking its time. And we really want to see Canada speaking out more.
Thank you, Catherine. Christopher, I see you've put a question in the chat. We're rapidly running out of time. I want to give you an opportunity, perhaps to ask your question, and also anything you would like to draw our attention to.
No, I was hoping for a bit of an update on the global moratoria. Like, I know I interviewed Catherine when I was working on my chapter, and so she so I just wanted to find out, you've already touched, you said, Catherine, about 25 countries are supporting like a full moratorium. Is that what it is?
So the language is interestingly different in different places. There's actually three types of language being used. One is moratorium, one is ban, and one is precautionary pause. Under the moratorium and the precautionary pause countries, there's a lot of difference in how they're framing their language. Some are much, much stronger than others. But there's one country, which is France, which has called for an outright ban. And of course, that's where most of the Pacific peoples who are part of what they call the Pacific Blue Line are calling for an outright ban. So if you actually, we have a website called Stop Deep Sea Mining, stopdeepseamining.ca, I think it is. And we're behind at the moment because more countries have joined since we've been trying to keep it updated. We try to have links there that you can go to the individual statements that countries have made so you can read, and I think Canada's is one of those more weaselly ones, but there's others that look like Canada's where they're saying there should be a moratorium. We will not approve a project to mine, to get a mining permit until there's robust regulations. I think the problem is, can there ever be regulations that are robust enough to stop the harm, which is clearly going to happen? If you are destroying habitat to get at those metals, the metals are the habitat. How can, it really is a contradiction in terms that you could create regulations robust enough to be acceptable for this kind of destruction. And given that they don't even understand what's down there, they can't even create a proper baseline. On land, mining companies are expected to come up with a baseline of the habitat that they're going to mine to say what is going to be harmed. And then they can look at mitigating circumstances, or can they move things or whatever. They can't even create a baseline in the deep sea. So, scientists, deep sea scientists are saying to be able to even just come up with that baseline upon which regulations would have to be based will take, well, some say decades. So, we're in a very strange place where we're saying we want a moratorium until there's robust regulations, and yet everybody kind of knows that we can't have robust regulations for decades, if ever, really. So. Well,
I wish we could end on a more optimistic note, but I do want, we've reached the end of our time, and on behalf of everybody present, I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Catherine Coumans from Mining Watch Canada for really a brilliant analysis and such important information, and to Christopher Pollon, independent journalist and author of the book Pitfall: The race to mine the world's most vulnerable places. Make sure you get a copy of that book. I think Christopher is a wordsmith par excellence, and I really look forward to reading more of it. And to all of you, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good evening.